Stay open to Isaiah chapter 41. If you need the notes, just hold your hand up. The men are ready to serve you with those. Preaching through the book of Isaiah, and now come to chapter 41. Children of Israel are, if not in, or very soon going into captivity at this point for 70 years of captivity. 70 years pulled away. Jerusalem will be destroyed. Their families that are alive will be taken into Babylon. The poor folks, some of the poor folk will be left there in Jerusalem. And God now, as He approaches here in chapter 41, is trying to, as He did in chapter 40, trying to encourage His people, trying to build His people up, trying to help His people, to help them have faith. Because in spite of the fact they're in captivity, in spite of the fact they're having heartache, in spite of the fact things are not looking well, He's still in control. He is still their God. He is still the one on the throne, and He's still and always will be God. And so He's trying to help them go through with that. Now, in particular, in this chapter, He's dealing with something that most of us deal with, and that's fear. Verse number 10, if you would, one of the key verses in this chapter says, "Fear thou not, for I am with thee. Be not dismayed. For I am thy God, I will strengthen thee. Yea, I will help thee. Yea, I will uphold thee with the right hand of my righteousness." So He's dealing in this passage with fear. Most of us experience some kind of fear. We fear health issues. We fear financial issues. We fear the future. We feel people. We fear losing our jobs. We just have so much we fear in this world. But the problem is we fear the wrong things. Are you out there this morning? You have to stay with me. I want you to talk with me. We fear the wrong things too often. We fear man. We fear not being popular. We fear somebody looking down upon us. We fear somebody thinking less of us. We fear not having enough wherewithal, enough finances to live until we're 130 years old. How many are going? Well, I'm not going to ask that. But we fear about that. We fear about being mocked. We fear about being disrespected. We fear, as I said, money issues. We fear this and we fear that. And most of those things we should not fear. But what we should fear, we're not. What we should be concerned about, we're not. The Bible teaches us we ought to fear God. We ought to have a reverential, holy fear of God. Not because He's an ogre, not because He's mean, not because He's going to beat us up, but because He is holy, He is righteous, and we ought to fear disappointing Him. We ought to fear His wrath if we would get in sin and His chastening, but fear not walking with Him. So we ought to fear God. A second thing we ought to fear, I think it's one of the few things the Apostle Paul feared, and that is fear of being put on the shelf. 1 Corinthians 9. Again, Apostle Paul had been through so many things, so many beatings, so many shipwrecks, and he was just so bold in the faith. Yet we find, I think, in this passage, 1 Corinthians 9:26, something he was afraid of. "I therefore so run, not as uncertainly, so fight I, not as one that beateth the air, but I keep under my body and bring it into subjection, lest by any means," he says, "by any means, when I have preached to others," all the preaching he had done about salvation, the preaching about holiness, the preaching about trusting God, the preaching about forgiving, the preaching about building up other folks, "when I have preached to others, I myself should be a castaway." Well, he was afraid he was just going to be put on the shelf. He was afraid that in spite of all the preaching he did, that one day he might find himself have fallen into some of that sin, or he himself might have found himself cooled off. He himself might find himself not really being used of God and not walking with God, and finding himself a castaway or put on the shelf. Not that he's worried about losing his salvation, but losing that walk, losing that relationship with God and usefulness for God. We ought to fear that. We ought to fear not being able to be used by God, regardless of our age, regardless of what's going on. But God's trying to help His people here and us about our fear. About our fear. These folks, we sit here in an air-conditioned and heated room. We sit here with our cars out there and the police out there ready to protect us if something goes wrong. We feel so secure in so many areas, and we fear those side issues and those things we should not fear. These folks had some real fear. They had an enemy coming to destroy Jerusalem. They were in captivity. They had lost or were soon to lose family members. And those that were alive, those that survived that overtaking of Jerusalem and Israel, they were now going to be taken into Babylon and be slaves and to be workers for the next 70 years. I want you to picture it best we can. Most of our generation, we've not had this issue. But let's say while we're sitting here, the sirens start going off, and Iraq has bombed San Francisco. And before we get out of here, the Iraqi and Chinese police and military gather us up, put us in a bus, take us to the airport, put us on a ship somewhere, and send us to Iraq. You say, what about my kids? You may never see them again. What about my house? Not your house anymore. Well, what about my job? You don't have to worry about a job. And they tell you, no, you're going to be here forever until you die in Iraq or those desert places. That's the kind of position they found themselves in. It's not, well, I'm afraid I'm going to get sick. I'm afraid I'm not going to. No. I mean, they had some real things to fear. And so God, as He speaks to them, and these folks in captivity, these folks that had lost their parents or lost their kids and lost their possessions, and just wondering what was going to happen and how it was going to go, these folks here, God's trying to help them not to fear. Now, we read that and we think about that, and He says, fear thou not. We want to say, are you kidding? I'm a slave? Are you kidding? I've just lost everything. I'm in the enemy territory. I'm being held captive by these folks, and yet you tell me to fear not. So this morning, I want us to learn how to fear not. I want us to take this passage, this instruction to help us. So in our little things that we fear, we learn not to fear. And if Jesus should tarry His coming and we should find ourselves in persecution, we should find ourselves in trouble, we should find ourselves in the jail cell because for the cause of Christ, we find ourselves in whatever situation, we will also learn how not to fear. The Bible tells us in 2 Timothy 1:7, for God hath not given us the spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. So the only way for us to be able to not fear, if that should happen, by the way, that situation I just told you about Iraq and the Chinese, that happens all around the world. It's happening now in different places. So it could happen here. And we got to learn not to fear. And the only way we can learn not to fear in those situations is the same thing God tries to teach them here. So we need to learn the lesson that these folks were taught about how not to fear. Fear thou not. How many have had a fear in the last 6 months? I mean, you'd be honest, your stomach was hurting, your neck maybe bothered you, you maybe got a little cold sweat, you maybe even started to get sick because you were afraid of what was going to happen, whether it be the IRS, whether it be the medical doctor, whether it be we don't know. I don't know, but you do. And God says He's going to teach us how not to fear. Now, the way we learn not to fear is to learn and to live the paradigm God is trying to teach His people right here. It's a whole mindset we need to understand. And Isaiah's, throughout the book of Isaiah, he's trying to teach us that. So you and I this morning, we must get this right mindset. We must have this right belief. We must not just know it, but we must believe it. And we must live it and let that belief and that truth work in our hearts and work in our lives to change every aspect of our life. So when the trials come, we don't have to be afraid. So when the difficulties come, we don't have to fear. So when the challenges come, we do not have to fear what man can do to us. And these paradigms He's going to show us today is we need to know who He is. We need to know who we are and what He can do so we do not have to fear. The problem is we don't see God high and lifted up as Isaiah did. We don't see Him as all-powerful. We don't see Him as the Holy One, as we're going to see here in a few moments. He's trying to teach them. And if we could see that how He is, and then understand who we are. If you're saved today, if you're a child of God, you're His kids. We're His people, and He's going to provide for us and protect us and chasten us if necessary, but He's still going to be our God. So we see Him high and lifted up. We see ourselves as being His possessions and humbly submitting ourselves to Him and living for Him, and then we can trust Him, and we learn some things today about who He is. Then when the problems come, we can say, I can hear God saying, fear thou not. Yeah, that does not mean you're not going to have trouble. That doesn't mean you're not going to find yourself in jail for the cause of Christ. It does not mean you're not going to find yourself abused. It does not mean you will not be taken captive somewhere. But he says when that happens, you can say, fear thou not. Mom and Dad, you could say that to your kids. Fear thou not. Say that to your spouse. Fear thou not. So we're looking at this passage and God's trying to teach them how not to fear. So let's learn today and how to believe, how to respond so we can live and fear thou not. Very quickly, some very simple thoughts in this passage. Number one, who has said, fear thou not? Who is it that has said, fear thou not? It makes a difference who says that. If I say that, oh, don't be afraid, you say, yeah, that's easy for you to say. Yeah. You see somebody up on a cliff over there, getting ready to take a selfie. Isn't it amazing? I'm going to take a selfie. Let me just back up. Whoa! Down they go. Another story, another message. But we see somebody on the edge somewhere and they're about to fall over, they're concerned, and we say, don't be afraid. That's easy for you to say. You're in the safe spot. You're in a conditioned spot. So it makes a difference who is saying, fear thou not. So let's look at the passage. Look at verse number 4. We're going to find out who is saying, fear thou not. As God is speaking to His people, which is, we are His people also. And also, they being the church in the wilderness, so we are the church. So God speaks to us as well. We find who it is that said, fear thou not. First of all, we find it is Jehovah Himself. Verses 2 and 3, He's talking about calling out of Abraham. And how Abraham, well, let's look at verse number 2. Who raised up the righteous man from the east, called him to his foot, gave the nations before him, and made him rule over kings, who gave them as the dust to his sword, and as the driven stubble to his bow. Well, he says, who was it? And we think we could go back and study about Abraham and how he rescued the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah and brought them back. He said, who did that? Verse 3, he pursued and passed safely, even by the way that he had not gone with his feet. Who hath wrought and who hath done it? Calling the generations from the beginning. He said, who has done that? Who has brought that man? Who called that man? Who empowered that man? Who made sure he had that victory? This man who's over the kings. I, the Lord, the first and with the last, I am He. The Lord there is all in caps, which means Jehovah Himself. Jehovah, the self-existent one. It's Jehovah, the self-existent one, that is saying, fear thou not. It's not just a king, it's not just a preacher, it's not just Isaiah saying it. It's God Himself that's saying. He looks at us, the self-existent one, the all-powerful one, is saying, fear thou not. That's why in Hebrews 13:6 it says, so that we may boldly say, the Lord is my helper, I will not fear what man shall do to me. Oh, I'm glad it's Jehovah, the all-powerful, self-existent one who speaks to you and me as His people today, says, fear thou not. So the next time the devil tries to put you in a fearful spot, trying to get you to cower down, trying to get you to quit because you're afraid, trying to get you to doubt God because you're afraid, and just begin to become a nervous wreck so we cannot serve God, so we cannot obey God, so we cannot praise God, so we cannot tell others about God, so we cannot be the witness we need to be for God, we can say, wait a minute, God speaks to me today, the Jehovah, the self-existent one, the all-powerful one. He tells me, fear thou not. You say, but preacher, I've lost the battle. I'm in jail for the cause of Christ. I've lost my job for the cause of Christ. I've been persecuted for the cause of Christ. I'm worried about this. Jehovah still says, the self-existent one, the all-powerful one, fear thou not. The self-existent one. That means He's always been. He's self-existent. He always has been and always will be. Somehow we got the idea, we may not formulate it this way, but this is how we act. If I don't believe in Him, He's not God. I mean, you go out and talk to folks about heaven and hell and about God, and their answer is, well, I just don't want to believe that. He's still God. Well, I don't want to believe in hell. There's still hell. Well, I don't want to believe in the cross. He's God whether anybody believes in Him or not. He's God if nobody obeys Him or not. He's God if anybody respects Him or not. He is God. He's self-existent. He was God long before He spoke the universe into existence. He's going to be God for all eternity. He always has been and always will be. He's the I am that He told Moses. When Moses said, "Who shall I say sent me?" The I am. Not the I was, not that I hope to be, not that one day I will be, but the I am. The Bible says He dwells in eternity. He dwells in eternity. That means He's here today. Praise the Lord. But He's also still in yesterday. And He's also in tomorrow at the same time. You say, how can that be? That'd be a miracle. He's Jehovah, the self-existent, all-powerful one. Without us believing, without us obeying, without us worshiping Him, He is still God. So we have the privilege to obey. We have the privilege to worship. We have the privilege to trust. But whether we do or not, He's still God. And so God speaking to His people says, fear thou not. It's Jehovah, the self-existent one. Let Him speak to us. Fear thou not. If anybody knows, it's Him. If anybody can handle it, it's Him. If anybody we can trust, it's Him. The self-existent one. Number 2, the redeeming one. The redeeming one. Look at verse 14. Fear not. There he is, several passages in this chapter. Fear not, thou worm, Jacob. We sing that song. Died for such a worm as I. Oh, that's a terrible thing. No, that's what, compared to God, we're just a little wiggly worm. About as much power, about as much might, about as much to fear as anybody. Says, fear not, thou worm, Jacob, and ye men of Israel. I will help thee, saith the Lord, and thy Redeemer, the Holy One of Israel. Thy Redeemer. I like the fact that we see both the Jehovah and the Redeemer being one right there. Saith the Lord, Jehovah, and thy Redeemer. Of course, we know Redeemer's Jesus Christ. He's the redeeming one. He's the one that bought them. He's the one that brought them out. See, redemption isn't just a New Testament picture. It's pictured in the Old Testament and primarily there in those days of where they were in Egypt underneath the slavery of the Egyptian king. And how God brought them out, bought them out by the blood of the Lamb. They took that perfect lamb, and we know the story, how He put it across the doorpost. And you put that blood there of that perfect lamb, and God said, when the death angel comes through, He said, when I see the blood, I will pass over. And that night, God delivered them and brought them out by that blood. He redeemed them. Galatians 4:4. But when the fullness of time was come, God sent forth His Son, made of a woman, made under the law, to redeem them that were under the law, that we might receive the adoption of sons. He brought them by the blood out of Egypt. He brought us out of hell and out of the control of the devil and from our sin by the blood of the Lamb of God. Boy, we've been bought. He's bought us. So here's the one who's saying, fear thou not. To the people who are in captivity, the people who are seeing such devastation, doesn't mean they weren't going to weep. Doesn't mean they weren't going to have problems. Didn't mean they weren't going to have difficulty. Didn't mean some were going to be hungry. Didn't mean some weren't going to be hurt. But He said, fear thou not. Who said that? The self-existent one. Jehovah Himself. Who said that? The redeeming one. The one who bought me. 1 Corinthians 6:20. For you are bought with a price. Therefore glorify God in your body and in your spirit, which are God's. Oh, He's bought us. Aren't you glad? And He's the one that says, fear thou not. I've bought you. I've purchased you. I brought you out. Fear thou not. Next time the fear comes and quakes upon you and you begin to get that nervous sickness because you're afraid, because of fear, doesn't mean you shouldn't be on guard, doesn't mean you shouldn't take the right steps, but that fear that grips you, that fear that keeps you from serving God, that fear that keeps you from walking with God, that keeps you from praising God and smiling and tell other folks about God. We can say, wait a minute, the self-existent one says, fear thou not. The one who bought me, the one who shed His blood for me says, fear thou not. Number 3, we find in verse 14, not just the self-existent one, not just the redeeming one, but the Holy One. The Holy One. See, if we can get a right perspective of who this God is we serve, things would be different. Hello? If we could see God high and lifted up and realize that He's the Holy One, He's the self-existent one, He's the redeeming one, and we're going to see another step in just a second. When we can see that, our lives would be changed. We'd find ourselves in God's house every time the doors were open. We'd find ourselves every morning spending time with Him. We'd see the world as God's handiwork. We'd see the God working in our families and our hearts. We'd want to pray to Him. We'd want to serve Him. It would change our life if we could understand who it is. It says, fear thou not. He's the Holy One. Look at verse 14. Fear not, thou worm Jacob, and ye men of Israel. I will help thee, saith the Lord, and the Redeemer, the Holy One of Israel. He's holy. I just finished up a series on Wednesday night. I think we've got one more Wednesday night about in the beauty of holiness. How the Bible talks about worship the Lord in the beauty of holiness and all the different the Holy Trinity, the holy matrimony, holy people, the Holy Scriptures, and all the things God says is holy. We're going through that series. He is holy. We live in an unholy world. We live in an unholy society. Even the good things we say, well, that's a good movie, or that's a good TV show, or that, it's not holy. God is holy. And He is the Holy One. Leviticus 11:45. For I am the Lord that bringeth you up out of the land of Egypt. He said, I redeemed you to be your God. Ye shall therefore be holy, for I am holy. That's why we try not to address Him as the man upstairs. He's holy. He's not just, He is our elder brother. We're joint heirs with Christ. He calls us His brethren. So even when we say He's our brother, we use that reverentially. He's holy. That's why we try to make careful about our church services and about our lives, and why you and I many times try to walk a certain way because we're to be holy because He is holy. The one who bought us and the one who says, fear thou not. He's not a Santa. He's not just a statue in the corner. He's not somebody we just call out to when we're in trouble. He is holy. The Holy One. Even as Isaiah in chapter 6, where he saw God high and lifted up, and the angels, holy, holy, holy. Whether it's the holy for the Trinity, or whether it's just trying to help us understand. It's like a little kid says, how big was He? Well, He was big. He was big, big. I mean, He was big, big, big. So the angel says, He's holy, holy, holy. All the way through. He's the Holy One. By the way, He's the one that said, fear thou not. Fear thou not. We don't have to be afraid He's going to change His mind, that He's got some ulterior motives, that He's got some sin. He is holy. Fear thou not. Just like in the previous chapter and I'm still using it, I think that's going to stick with me forever. I'm praying it does. Haven't you heard? Don't you know? Don't you understand who God is? He's the Holy One. So He said, yes, you're going into captivity. Yes, your city's destroyed, but don't fear. Fear thou not. He's the Holy One that we serve. Verse 21 through 29, He teaches us He's the only one. The only one. 1 Kings 8:60, and there's many places in the Bible, it says, that all the people of the earth may know that the Lord, Jehovah, is God, and there is none else. There's nobody else like God. There is nobody else even close. There's nobody else that we can even compare Him to. We saw just in Isaiah 40, verse 18, to whom then will you liken God? Or what likeness will you compare unto Him? He's the only one. We talk about gods, we talk about power, we talk about strength. He's the only one. We saw in chapter 40, the nations are just like grasshoppers to Him. They're a drop in the bucket. What a God we serve. And He's the one that says, fear thou not. Look at verse 21. He starts talking about the idols. He says, verse 21, produce your cause, saith the Lord. Bring forth your strong reasons, saith the King of Jacob. So He's calling out to the idols. He says, let's have a little contest. He says, bring your issues to the court. Verse 22, let them bring them forth and show us what shall happen. Let them bring them forth and show us what shall happen. Let them show the former things what they be, that we may consider them and know the latter end of them, or declare unto us far to come. Show the things that are to come hereafter, that we may know that ye are gods. Yea, do good, or do evil, that we may be dismayed and behold it together. He's saying, bring in your idols and let them tell us what's going to happen. Bring in your idols and let them tell us what's going to take care. Notice what it says. Show us the former things. Let your idols come and tell us what happened back in history. Let your idols come and tell us what went on back in those days, that we may consider them and know the latter end of them. He says, let them come tell us what's going to happen in the future. Let your idols tell them. Let Muhammad tell you. Let Buddha tell you. Let Confucius tell you. Bring those false gods in and let them tell you what's going to happen so we can consider. Verse 23, show things that are to come hereafter, that we may know that ye are gods. Prove you're a god. Prove you got power. Prove you got might. Tell us what's going to happen so we can consider. And he goes on. Show the things that are to come hereafter, verse 23, that we may know you are gods. Yea, do good, or do evil. He says, do something, because you're not a god. You're just an idol. There's no power in you. There is nothing, that we may just hold and behold it. Verse 24, behold, ye, speaking to the idols, are of nothing, and your work of naught, and an abomination is he that chooseth thee. Oh, he's the only one. He's the one. They can't show, they can't do, and they can't save, and they can't hear. Whoa, he says, you go ahead and cry unto them, they will not hear. So when we say, oh, I got such trouble, wait a minute, are you a child of God? Are you saved? Are you redeemed? Is it Jehovah, the self-existent one from all eternity past and all eternity future? Is He your God? Is He the one that redeemed you and bought you? Is He the Holy One, the absolutely complete Holy One? Is He the only one in the universe that has the power close to Him that we cannot compare anything? Then He says, fear thou not. I think we ought not to fear. Who said, thou shalt fear not? Very quickly. To whom was said, fear thou not? We know who said it, but who's He speaking to? Who's He speaking to? His servants. Look at verse 8. In verse 6 and 7, it's talking about the building of idols and the making of idols. The carpenter encouraging the goldsmith and smooths it out, and they fasten it and they nail it so it won't be moved. He says, you got those. He says, but thou. These others are serving the idols. They're building their idols. They're caring for those. But thou, he said, Israel, art my servant, Jacob, whom I have chosen, the seed of Abraham, my friend. The key is we must know who we are and who we serve. See, when God says, thou shalt not fear. By the way, if we're not serving Him, if we're not following Him, if we're not classifying my life and my attitude and my paradigm and my respect, He's my Lord, He's my God, and I'm His servant, and so I'm following Him and I'm serving Him. If we're not serving, if we're not following, maybe we should fear. But if I'm the servant, if I'm following, if I'm humbly submitting to Him, if I'm looking to Him, I do not have to fear. But if I reject that and I push that away, it may be a time to fear. It's an amazing thing. People don't want nothing to do with God. They blaspheme God. They live a godless life, an unholy life, and a problem comes and they wonder why God is not bailing them out. But see, we want God to bail us out regardless of how we're living. Regardless of how we treat Him, regardless of whether we believe in Him, regardless of whether we submit to Him, regardless of how we serve Him. But God here speaking to His people, it's His servant. Very quickly, what kind of servants are they? What kind of servants are we? Again, this is not how we serve. This is what He's done for us. Who we are as servants. Who He's saying, thou shalt not fear. Fear thou not. First of all, the chosen servants. The chosen servants. Look at verse number 8. But thou, Israel, art my servant, Jacob, whom I have chosen. Chosen. I know sometimes we get concerned and worried about being chosen. I'm glad I'm chosen. I'm glad I'm chosen. We know there is an elect. We also know it's by God's foreknowledge. We also know whosoever shall call upon the name of the Lord. But God, from His foreknowledge, knows who's going to receive Him and who's going to be the whosoever that calls. And so it is chosen. We've been chosen. What a privilege to be the chosen servant. In John 15:19 it says, if you are of the world will love his own. But because ye are not of the world, but I have chosen you out of the world, therefore the world hateth you. Oh, He says, I've chosen you out of the world, and so the world hates you. Well, we are chosen servants of God. We're not to be serving the devil. We're not supposed to be serving the world. We're serving Him who has chosen us to be His servant. John 15:16. Ye have not chosen me, but I have chosen you, and ordained you that you should go and bring forth fruit, and that your fruit should remain, and whatsoever you shall ask of the Father in my name, He may give it you. Chosen. So who's He speaking to? His chosen ones. Those that are saved, those that are born again, those that are part of the family. Aren't you glad you're part of the family? You've trusted Christ as Savior. You've been born again. You are part of that. You are that chosen. Oh, I talk to folks and they say, well, I just don't believe. I guess I'm not part of the chosen. You could be. I guess I'm not. I don't believe. I guess you're not, but not yet anyway. But it's chosen. He's speaking to the chosen. Number two, He's speaking to the seed of Abraham. The seed of Abraham. Verses 1, 2, and 3 is talking about, as we saw that, verse number 4 also, about Abraham, his friend. But notice what it says in verse number 8. But thou, Israel, my servant, Jacob whom I have chosen, the seed of Abraham, my friend. Wow. That always strikes me. Abraham, God says, my friend. It's hard for us to put the two thoughts together. It is for me. Holy, holy, holy. And He calls me His friend. Wow. Certainly it's nothing of me. Abraham, my friend. But He's speaking to the seed of Abraham. He said, well, I guess that lets us Gentiles out. Aren't you glad it doesn't leave us Gentiles out? It says in Galatians 3, even as Abraham believed God, and it was accounted to him for righteousness, know ye therefore that they which are of faith, the same are the children of Abraham. Wow. So He's speaking to me as a child of Abraham, as a child of faith, as a child of a God. That's what He's talking about. Not only am I the seed of His friend, I'm the seed of Abraham. I'm the child of God also, because by faith, whether Jew or Gentile or Greek, bond or free, all one in Christ, I'm glad I'm the seed of Abraham by faith. Jewish by faith. Are you out there this morning? Oh, the seed of Abraham. To whom He said, thou shalt not fear. To the chosen. He's chosen. If you're saved, He's chosen you. And He says, don't fear. I've chosen you. What can happen to you that I don't permit? What can happen to you that I won't know what's best for you? What can happen to you? He said, because I've chosen you, and because you are of my seed, you are the seed of my friend Abraham. Not only are they the chosen, the seed of Abraham, but also the taken. The taken. Verse number 8. But thou, Israel, art my servant, Jacob, whom I have chosen, the seed of Abraham, my friend. Thou whom I have taken from the ends of the earth. The word taken there means snatched. He said, I pulled you out. I took you into myself. I took you out of Egypt. I took you out of the world. You are taken unto me. Well, I'm glad I'm taken by God. You see, and He's the one that says, thou shalt not fear. Revelation 5:9. And they sung a new song, saying, again, if you don't like singing, when you get to heaven, you're going to be miserable. And they sung a new song, saying, thou art worthy to take the book, to open the seals thereof, for thou wast slain and hast redeemed us to God by thy blood out of every kindred and tongue and people and nation. Ooh. Oh, all kinds of people, all nationalities, all genders, all colors. What a blessedness to be taken. And He's the one that's speaking to me. He said, listen, fear thou not. He said, I know who I am. Do you know who I am? Then He says, and I know who you are, my servant. Fear thou not. And then the called. The called. Verse 8. Verse 9. Whom thou hast taken from the ends of the earth, and called thee from the chief men thereof, and said unto thee, Thou art my servant, I have chosen thee, and not cast thee away. Well, he's called from the chief man. He's also called us. Not only chosen us, but then calls us. He's picked us, but then he calls us. He's redeemed us and then calls us. It's an amazing thing. He would redeem us and then ask us. That's amazing. He bought you and I with his own blood. Then he says, would you serve me? Would you love me? Would you walk with me? Yes, I know I'm God. I know I'm Jehovah. I know it cost me my blood. I know I bought you and I chose you. But now I'm just asking. How often do you think God gets disappointed with us? He doesn't make us. He calls us. He doesn't force us. He calls us. Though he's bought us, though he's chosen us, though he's taken us. See, we're out of this old world. We're not going to be condemned with the world. We're on our way to heaven. But then he calls us. He said, would you? Would you? Will you? Romans 8:30. Moreover, whom he did predestinate, them he also called. And whom he called, he also justified. And whom he justified, them he also glorified. What shall we say to these things? If God be for us, who can be against us? Boy, he called us and justified us, and we're going to share in the glory. I don't have to fear what man can do to me. I don't have to fret. If God be for us, who can be against us? That's what he's saying to the people there in Israel. He's saying, listen, I know you're in captivity. He says, but fear thou not. He says, I've called you. Oh, and then when he calls, he justifies, and whom he justifies, he glorifies. And who can we say against us? 2 Thessalonians 2:1. Whereunto he called you by our gospel to the obtaining of the glory of our Lord Jesus Christ. He said to us, fear thou not. Fear thou not. See, we get messed up because we fear, because we forget who he is. And we forget who we are. If we can understand who he is and who we are, and understand when he says, fear thou not, we don't have to fear. Very quickly, why we are not to fear. Why we are not to fear. That should be enough. It should be enough that God says, fear thou not. Okay, I know you're God and I'm your servant. Okay. But he goes and tells us why we don't have to fear. Why we can have faith in that. Why we can follow that. Very quickly, number one, his presence. His presence. We don't have to fear because we have his presence. Verse number 2. Are you out there this morning? Well, I'm saying we ought to leave out and say, I'm not going to let the devil scare me into not serving God. I'm not going to let the devil scare me into not giving to God. I'm not going to let the world scare me into not testifying for God. I'm not going to let what man can say to me or do to me make me change my lifestyle to match the old wicked world because I'm serving a holy God. I'm not going to let fear hinder me. Fear thou not. Verse 10. Fear thou not, for I am with thee. Be not dismayed. Boy, I'm glad we have his presence. He with me. I don't have to fear because of his presence. Hebrews 13:5. Let your conversation be without covetousness. Be content with such things as you have, for he hath said, I very seldom will leave thee. What does it say? I will never leave thee nor forsake thee. Psalm 37:28. For the Lord loveth judgment, and forsaketh not his saints. They are preserved forever, but the seed of the wicked shall be cut off. We talk about the Lord's Prayer. Or not the Lord's Prayer, the Psalm 23. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He leadeth me, He takes care of me, He provides for me. I'm glad we have his presence. He's with us. Who's with us? Not some Buddha. Not some little necklace I wear, but Jehovah, the all-powerful one, the Holy One, the only one, the redeeming one, is with me. Why should I not fear? Because God's with me. That all-powerful one is with me. His presence. Number 2, his power. His power. Presence is nice, but I need his power. You and I, we could go on a little tour of East St. Louis. When I was growing up, East St. Louis, you did not stop at stoplights. And he said, I mean, you just kept going. You did not want to stop. Well, it was a tough neighborhood, tough city. So you and I, you have to do some business at 10 o'clock at night down in East St. Louis, down in the worst part of East St. Louis. And I said, don't fear. I'll go with you. Good to be two dead, not just one. Because you say, what are you going to do to help me? What can you possibly do that's not going to scare anybody off. So we've got His presence, yes, but it's also His power. It's the one who goes with us. His power is what makes it. I don't have to fear because of His presence, but I also don't have to fear because of His power to give strength. Verse number 10. Fear thou not, for I am with thee. Be not dismayed, for I am thy God. I will strengthen thee. Yea, I will help thee. Yea, I will uphold thee with the right hand of my righteousness. So He's got the power. His power to give strength. He's the one that said, fear thou not. He's there to help. Aren't you glad He's there to help? He's not there just to watch. He's not there just to console. He's not there just to pat you on the back. He's not there to say, well, I'm here, so when you get tired. No, He's there to help me. Psalm 121:1. I will lift up my eyes into the hills, from whence cometh my help. My help cometh from the Lord, which made heaven and earth. Boy, it's Him that brings us the help. Where are you going to get help? The Lord Himself. I'm glad we have people that can help us. I'm glad we can look to our friends to help us. But when it gets right down to it, the one that's going to tell me not to fear is God, because of His presence and because of His power. He is my help. Oh, we look to everybody else for help, but not for God. 2 Chronicles 32:7. Be strong and courageous. Be not afraid or dismayed for the king of Assyria, nor for all the multitude that is with him. Don't be afraid of Hollywood. Don't be afraid of all the wicked crowd. Don't be afraid of the homosexual crowd. Don't be afraid of those groups of people, nor all the multitude that is with him. For there be more with us than with him. With him is the arm of flesh, but with us is the Lord our God to help us and to fight our battles. Whoa. Power to help. Again, I can tell you, I'm going to try to help you, but not much I can do. There's nothing He can't do. His power, not just His presence, His power to give strength, to help, and to hold. And to hold. Look at verse 10. For I am thy God, the middle part of the verse. I will strengthen thee. He said, I'll give you strength. Yea, I will help you thee. He says, I'll help you. Yea, I will uphold thee with the right hand of my righteousness. So He's going to hold us up. He's going to hold it. He said, I will uphold thee. He said, I'm going to keep you up. I'm going to give you that strength you need to keep standing, to keep walking. I'm going to uphold you. I'm going to lift you up. You just lean on my arm. My arm's going to lift you up. I'm glad He upholds us. He upholds us. Oh, you say, preacher, I just can't make it. Yes, you can, because He is there to help us by holding us up. Oh, and He's the one that says, fear not. But not just hold us up, but to hold on. To hold on. Look at verse 13. This is an amazing little verse. We can teach this to our kids, but I wish we'd understand it. For I, the Lord thy God, will hold thy right hand, saying unto thee, fear not, I will help thee. For those of us that are parents and help our kids grow up, you know what it's like when your kid's afraid and you say, here, just hold my hand. Let me hold your hand. Or maybe you remember being a little kid, being afraid. And Daddy says, here, let me hold your hand. Wow. Yeah, we can do this. Yes, we can go there. Yes. Well, what comfort that brought when your dad was holding your hand. God says, I'll hold your right hand. I'll hold your hand. So just like a little child, when you're holding a child's hand, Dad and Mom, you do that so they don't get lost. As long as you got the hand, they're not going to be far from you. You've got them right there. When you're holding their hand, they're secure. When you're holding their hand, they won't fall. They may stumble, but you've got them right there to lift them up. They won't get left behind. I'm not going to ask you if you ever left any kids behind. He said, I'll hold your hand. His power to help, His power to hold us up and to hold our hand. He's the one that says, fear thou not. He said, let me hold your hand. Come on. Fear thou not. Problem is, we refuse His hand. We reject His hand. He says, no, I'm going to do my own thing. I'm going to do my own. No wonder we fear. Why should we fear not? Because of His power. Because of His presence. His power to help. His power to hold. Also because of His provisions. We don't have to fear because of His provisions. Look at verse 15. Behold, I will make thee we see that first of all His provision for victory over the battle. I will make thee a new sharp threshing instrument, having teeth. Thou shalt thresh the mountains, and beat them small, and make the hills as chaff. Thou shalt fan them, and the wind shall carry them away, and the whirlwind shall scatter them. And thou shalt rejoice in the Lord, and shalt glory in the Holy One of Israel. Well, He's talking about, He says, you're going to defeat your enemy. In fact, earlier on, He says, you're going to look for them, and you won't even be able to find them anymore. He says, I'm going to give you an instrument. I'm going to make you an instrument. I'm not sure whether He made an instrument and gave it to him, or He made them the instrument. But He said, I'm going to make you an instrument. He says, you're going to defeat the enemy. You're going to wipe them out. The wind's going to blow them. He said, you're going to get complete victory. I'm glad we're on the winning side. I'm glad He's made provision for us for victory. Victory in Jesus, we sing about it. Faith is the victory. We're on the winning side. We have to understand why we're not to fear is because He's provided for us for the victory. He's also provided for us for the needy. Verse 17. When the poor and the needy seek water, and there is none, and their tongue faileth for thirst. By the way, they're thirsty. Well, if God was really with us, we wouldn't get thirsty. No, they're thirsty. They're thirsty. And their tongue faileth for thirst. I, the Lord, will hear them. We go back. If we're thirsty, what do we need to do, class? We need to pray. He said, I'll hear him. He said, He didn't see him thirsty. He said, well, I'll give him water. No, He says, I'll hear him when they ask for it. I'll hear him when they come to me. I'll hear him when they plead for that water, when they beseech me for that water. I, the Lord, will hear them. I, the God of Israel, will not forsake them. I will open rivers in high places and fountains in the midst of the valleys. I will make the wilderness a pool of water and the dry land springs of water. Wow. He says they get thirsty. They don't have any. He says, but when they call to me, I'll hear, and I'll give them more water than they can imagine. I'll give them more water than they need. How can He do that? Because He's Jehovah. Because of His power, because He's the self-existent one, because He's the Creator, and He loves it. Boy, we can fear thou not. If we're serving Him and following Him and submissive to Him, obeying Him, He said we don't have to fear because we are His, because of His provision for victory, His provision for the needy, and for His purpose. And His purpose. Verse number 20. Verse 19. He's opened up the rivers in verse 18. He's opened the fountains and the pools. I will plant in the wilderness the cedar and the shittith tree and the myrtle and the oil tree. I will set in the desert the fir tree and the pine and the box tree together, that those enemies, the world, that us may see and know and consider and understand together the hand of the Lord hath done this, and the Holy One of Israel hath created it. His purpose is the world may know. That we may know. See, when we see His provision, when we see His power, when He provides for us, so we don't have to fear, He says that the world will see it. That's what He says. That they may see. Mom and Dad, what do your kids see when the problems come? Do they see you depending upon God, trusting God, praying to God, and had God give answers? Or do they see you fearful and see you crying and see you falling apart and not able to serve God? Do your co-workers see what God does in your life? He says that they may see. I'll do this. He says so they can see, so they can know it, so they can consider it, so they can understand it. Why we don't have to fear? Because He's got a purpose in it. He's got a purpose even in the trials and even in the difficulties, that the world may see Him working in us and for us and through us. So this morning I don't know what you're facing. I don't know what you're going to face next week. I don't know what we're going to face if Jesus tarries next month or next year or next 10 years. But we may find ourselves, just for preaching the Word of God, just for living a Christian life, just for witnessing for Him, we may find ourselves in bondage. We may find ourselves being persecuted. But listen to Jehovah. He says, I want to help you. Fear thou not. Fear thou not. God has not given us the spirit of fear. Doesn't mean be crazy. But we serve one who's mightier than all. He's the only one. He's the redeeming one. He's the self-existent one. It says, fear thou not, my servant. Fear thou not. Let's bow our heads, please.